Hi, my name is Steve Merman, and I'm a Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. Today I'm going to talk to you about Rosa using ECR as a secure image registry. So if you're not familiar, Rosa is a managed OpenShift running on AWS. Now it has many of the same capabilities that the typical OpenShift installation would have, of course, except for the idea of you having to manage the actual infrastructure and the behind-the-scenes components, which is the whole idea of the managed service itself. But some of the core things that it still has is it still has, of course, the nodes, and it still has a couple things like the users that you're going to assign, the permissions, and then also things like service accounts. So service accounts can be assigned inside of a project, for example, if you want a service account to do something specific around your implementation inside of that project or namespace. Now, when you talk about Rosa itself, one of the concerns that comes up is I've got all these container images that are sitting out here. What do I do? How do I store them? Where can I put them and make sure that they're secure, but make sure that people that need the access have access to them? So that's where ECR comes in. So ECR is the Elastic Container Registry on AWS. So ECR is going to give you a private registry. So we'll just mark that as P, where you can actually store these container images. Now the question is, okay, I've got the container images there, so what am I going to do and how am I going to access them? So while it has your private registry, it also has the idea of permissions. And what the permissions do is they say, okay, I want to give access to this private registry, but what I need to know is, what is the principal that's trying to get access? What are the conditions around that? What are some of the actions that you're trying to operate? What specifically are you trying to do against that registry? So it does those checks for you, and it does it at the ECR level. So the only component that's missing here is, okay, so where do I get the principal from? Because we're not going to have Rosa talk directly to ECR, because essentially you've got OpenShift talking to the AWS service. So this is where IAM comes in. This is AWS's Identity and Access Management. Okay, and what this is going to do is this is going to give you the roles that you're going to need. So the role specifically that's going to be allowed to call ECR and be able to pull the images. It's going to allow you to set the policies. And the policy is going to determine what level of access that person has. So are they able to just pull images? Are they able to push images? Are they able to make modifications? How many registries, for example, do they have access to? Those are some of the important things. And then you're going to have the trust that's going to do the linkage between linkage on a couple areas between OIDC as well as through ECR. So what this does is this says now that you have your service account, so Rosa can use your service account to use what's called the Secure Token Service from AWS. And the Secure Token Service is going to give you temporary credentials that have access as you've defined inside of IAM. So your service account would then make a call to STS. It would get those temporary tokens, or basically get temporary credentials that can then run as this role that has this permissions and has these trust policies. Now using that role, I can now access this private registry. So from a Rosa perspective, if I have, let's say I have project or namespace 1, okay, and then I have a service account, and we'll just call that NM1. Namespace 1 is my service account. When I'm doing the calls, what I can do is I can say, okay, I need to use this service account to then call STS. I need to get my temporary tokens, which down here are going to have a role that is specific to, I put NM, but that's specific to, in this case, NM1. It's going to have policies that are going to say, okay, I'm allowed to pull from this private registry, and then it's going to have a trust relationship that allows everything to be kind of mapped together. So now as this user that's being assumed by Rosa, I can make the call, I can pull out my image from that private container, and then I can go ahead and deploy it. Another cool thing about this is when you set it up this way and you use these service accounts, you can now have these containers that are running in your Rosa cluster as opposed to running under the admin ID that you have specifically assigned to the node itself. So essentially the node has a user from the AWS side, and instead of running everything in that role, now I can use this role as well and say, for example, namespace 1 could then run containers that are running inside of namespace 1, or more specifically the pods themselves. What this does is this gives you a lot of fine-grained access and fine-grained control, because now I can specifically know who's called this registry, what images are there, who has access to it. I have the audit trail to see who can push, who can pull, and then I can limit it based on this specific set of service accounts. So as developers come in at the developer level, I can tie them into a namespace, and then they would have access to just pull specific images from their private registry. And that way you have a level of isolation that's occurring here. And there's a lot more components. There's a lot more elaboration you can do to kind of expand it and make it much wider as you start to get to development, test, QA, production. But you kind of get the idea here. I've also published a blog that gives you the very specific steps. So if you want to implement this, it'll take you line by line on how to set it up, how to configure it, as well as some other considerations you may want to look at. So thanks for the time today. I appreciate it. Again, I'm Steve Merman from AWS, Partner Solutions Architect, and good luck. Thank you.